Hello, everybody. I hope you're all having a fantastic start to your week 3 of the spring semester. My name is Lake, and I will be conducting the guest lecture for this week, which covers Chapter 1 of our Schoenfield textbook. And this week, we are continuing our learning about designing secure programs. So, just to quickly recap the main ideas from Chapter 1, so we're just all on the same page. Chapter 1 basically sets the big picture context for why security architecture even matters today. So, Schoenfield starts with this idea of this omnipresent cyber war, where we are all living in a world where digital attacks are constant, and everything that is connected is a potential target. And even worse, old exploits never really die. They just keep showing up and propagating in new systems. And if we don't design better defenses from the start, this keeps happening. And so this really leads into the main idea of the chapter, which is basically this idea that security architects need to bake security into the architecture itself. So it cannot just be an afterthought of just patches and remediation. And this is where I want to jump off of what we read about and dive a little deeper into the subject of section 1.2 in the reading, which is titled Know the Threat Actors. So security architects should understand the threats early. They should be able to model them and then design systems that resist these attacks proactively. And so, why is this such a big deal in security architecture? Is because without profiling these actors, um, you're basically guessing at defenses. So, for example, if you're designing a secure network, it's nice to know that nation state actors who often are characterized by high persistence or advanced tools, things like this. They love lateral movement, for example, or they long-term dwell or like long-term dwell time means that you might want to prioritize network segmentation and monitoring over just having perimeter firewalls. Or for an operating system, if you're dealing with insider threats or like lower skill criminals, you might want to focus on privilege escalation blocks and quick patching of like common exploits. So in our reading, it's basically gets compared to historical piracy, where these warlords and pirates operate in chaos and exploit weak spots wherever they found them. So today, it's the same. We have ransomware crews, advanced persistent threat groups, hacktivists. They all have different playbooks. And the secret is using that knowledge to shape your architecture decisions early so you're not just reacting to things. And that's what I want to talk about today, about the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which gives a way for security architects to map specific attack behaviors to defensive controls. So if we put it simply, the attack framework acts as a sort of shared language for exactly how attackers tend to operate. So it's a catalog of behaviors. And this is especially important for people trying to defend against attackers, because if we understand how they behave, we can defend accordingly. And MITRE basically catalogs these behaviors into what is called TTPs, which stands for tactics, techniques, and procedures. A tactic is an adversary's goal or objective. It's the why of an attack. A technique is how an adversary achieves their goal or objective. And a procedure is the implementation of how the technique is executed. And so attacks are broken into phases, like initial access or credential access, for example, and each phase is a stepping stone towards the attacker's end goal. And the framework is basically is quite practical because you're mapping real threat groups to specific techniques they actually use. So instead of just saying, nation states are sophisticated, they use sophisticated attack methods. You can point to concrete patterns, like how, APT-29 favors stealthy credential theft or living off the land tools, for example. And maybe cybercrime groups lean more towards commodity phishing and ransomware. And so obviously this helps us think more like the actual attacker we're designing our systems and environment to protect against. And you can look up which techniques they might actually use, then ask, where in my architecture could these techniques work? And that becomes your threat model. Then you can, map those specific controls and detections to those techniques. And also on top of that, it closes the loop. So, for example, like your red team can emulate those same techniques in your framework as part of their playbook, or your blue team validates the detections against them. And then you can update designs based on what worked or what got missed. So it basically just allows for everyone to be on the same page. So I think, for example, our textbook was published around 2019. And since then, the attack framework has evolved massively because now it covers things like cloud and mobile and industrial control systems. And it includes real detection analytics tied to specific techniques. So it's become less of just an encyclopedia and more of an operational system. Okay, so now I'm just going to demo a bit and show how someone might use the MITRE ATT&CK framework to help with their security architecture. So this is the enterprise matrix. There's also mobile and industrial control systems. But this is probably the more useful matrix for, protecting your company, for example. So currently it's version 18. It was released in October 2025, and it's still current. It has 14 tactics and 216 techniques, and 475 sub-techniques. And it includes the relevant mitigations and detections. So it's super comprehensive. You can also use the Attack Navigator, which is a useful tool for annotating and exploring the matrices. And that's kind of what this looks like. So you can add layers and, open existing things. It's a pretty useful tool. And we'll look more of that when we cover an example. So let's check it out. So basically the tactics are represented across the top of the matrix. So right here, reconnaissance, resource development, initial access, blah, blah, blah. You can scroll across. There's more. So each of these tactics contains techniques which are nested below them, which can be expanded to reveal sub-techniques. So let's say an attacker wants to perform reconnaissance on their target. This is the attacker's goal. The technique is, they might utilize the active scanning technique, and this is how they achieve their reconnaissance goal. And within that technique, there's a sub-technique, or multiple in this case, and active scanning compromises 3 specific methods here. So scanning IP blocks, vulnerability scanning, or wordless scanning. So we can take, a closer look at any of these. So for example, active scanning. And on the techniques detail page that we have here, you will see the sub-techniques listed again, or are they here? And the linked page will also include all of the relevant information. So you have a description and a technique ID, which is pretty often encountered in cybersecurity research. And then alongside all that, each tactic and technique page includes procedure examples. Um, so stuff like this comes in the description. Um, uh, as you can see here, it has mitigations, detection strategy. Oftentimes, what you'll see here is that there's also things listed like software used or campaigns, um, which gives a little more detail about um, the tactic and maybe who's like what groups are using the tactic. So to give an example, we have here the groups page. So here listed is just a bunch of common threat actor groups. And so for this example, we have Lazarus Group. So they're a pretty notorious North Korean state-sponsored group. You've probably heard about them. And so they've been mapped to a variety of attack techniques, which we can see in in the navigator, like I mentioned before. So all of these that are highlighted, there's a legend, so it's just different colors. All of these things that are highlighted are the preferred methods of doing things by this group. So it's really useful for correlating behavior patterns and figuring out next steps. So, for example, if you were getting attacked by this group, maybe you identify, their method of reconnaissance, gather victim identity information. Then you might know their next step is, reconnaissance through email addresses, and then maybe as part of their initial access campaign, they're phishing via spear phishing. So knowing how your attacker is planning to operate is extremely valuable information. And so we can tie this in with operating systems and secure networks by thinking about how an attacker actually moves once they get a foot in the door. So when we look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, many of the techniques like lateral movement or privilege escalation are literally just an attacker using an operating system's own administrative tools and power against itself. So they aren't always using a virus or malware. They're oftentimes using things like PowerShell or Windows management instrumentation to blend in with normal system traffic. So the framework also shows us that a flat network could be an attacker's playground. So if our network architecture doesn't have internal checkpoints, an attacker can use a technique like remote services to hop from a workstation to a higher value server. So basically, this can help us better understand how to properly configure our operating systems and networks for a more secure design. And just as a note, these are the references I used while researching.